What addict are you in right now? And is it haunted by any chance?
I hope it's not haunted. I was in here last night past midnight, so hopefully I would have seen ghosts. Getting rid of stuff. I was going through in our basement. Bins and bins of stuff that I've kept for years. That was like I ran the basketball competition at the '96 games, and
Yeah.
pictures of like all the FIBA international reps, and we gave Muhammad Ali actually a replica gold medal from the medal that he had thrown into the Mississippi River after the 1960s. Bringing that medal down, I brought Muhammad down at halftime of the gold medal game to get the medal given to him from Juan Antonio Samaranch, who at the time was head of the IOC. Luckily, my coworker, Charlie, who became my first business partner, was fluent in Spanish. So he got Juan Antonio, but I had the privilege of getting Muhammad Ali. And I've actually never seen anybody in my life where people had more reverence for an individual just in the interactions. It was incredible. So I was on loan, basically. David Stern and Russ Granick basically sent me, and Steve Mills, who was kind of my boss at the NBA, into Atlanta, basically as the player to be named later in a trade. So I was on loan for a year and a half to the Olympic Committee to run the men's and women's basketball competition, and then also ultimately the Paralympic basketball competition. It was actually
when you're unpacking everything, because when we did the move too, we had everything there for 20 years. I start looking back at the time I'm doing an event in Thailand for the NFL, and
oh wow,
and
wow.
you know, and
we're in Thailand, Bangkok, or
we were in Bangkok. Then
okay.
we went down on the River Kwai. We brought out like 300 school teachers to teach them the flag football, the 5-on-5 rules.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I don't know, Dan, how you feel about it, but when I was unpacking all that stuff, someone asked me about it. I said, it was great, but I don't think I enjoyed it as much. I would have enjoyed it more now, almost like going back later on in life, getting your MBA.
Yeah.
I said, because I didn't know how great it was.
I literally, this speaks to young people's perspective. So I was living in Toronto. The NBA had sent me to Toronto for Dream Team 2, which again, very lucky. You don't know what you don't know. And it came up in a meeting that we may send someone to Toronto to work on the World Championships of basketball. And John Pitoff, who was the owner of the Toronto Raptors, was kind of overseeing the World Championship. So I kind of peeked my head in my boss's office, Mike Golub, who's an amazing guy and mentor to me. And I said, hey, for what it's worth, I don't know who you're thinking who's going to go or if I'm qualified, but I would love to potentially go. And I was single, living in Weehawken, New Jersey. I think I was 26. And I always say this to young people when I talk to now. So I planted that seed. They were probably in some meeting, right, where they were like, oh, who are we going to send? And it's probably 10 people in the meeting. Mike probably said, oh, the Mannix kid said he'd go. And they're like, oh, let's send him. Who knows? I don't know how it got determined. But I'm a big believer when you raise your hand or you put yourself out there, a lot of opportunities can come from that. So I moved to Toronto and I was living there a year and a half, working crazy entrepreneurial environment. Basically from scratch, they were building a staff to run the World Championships. So actually they approached me and said, hey, we want you to potentially move to Atlanta for a year and a half to run the basketball. My first thing was not, oh my God, manage the basketball competition in the Olympics. It was, I've been out of New York for a year and a half. I was kind of getting ready to go back to New York. So I was actually I didn't jump right on it. I was like, I was like a little hesitant. And they're like, why don't you go down for this planning trip? The French Basketball Federation is coming in, or not just the basketball, all the French NGBs for each sport and the delegations. And you can kind of meet the French folks and get a sense for it. And I went to Atlanta for this trip and met these very sophisticated French men and women who, I felt intimidated by from the start. And it just hit me, the scale of the international aspect, the global nature of the whole Olympic movement. And I was just like, wow, this.
When you were still with the NBA, did you realize what you had, the opportunity that you had in front of you at that time? Do you think you were kind of emotionally intelligent enough at that moment? Or did you kind of say, hey, I'm going to use this to get my next thing?
It definitely wasn't the latter. And it's interesting, even with my agency, when we ended up selling, I thought, wow, I never started this being like, hey, we're gonna create a lot of this and to sell. It was always just trying to said, hey, we're gonna, at the time I had read Mark McCormick's book from IMG, what they don't teach you at Harvard Business School. I think Never Wrestle with a Pig is another one. And I was like, we're going to be the next IMG. Like, I didn't realize how silly that sounded when, we were starting. But I think one of the things that was very, again, blessed, David Stern, that I took when I started my own company. Just one thing I think of from the MBA and the people I worked with was the standards. There was this high, trying to set the highest standards and always pushing to kind of stretch for something greater. That just was like in the DNA of that company that I think, was fortunate to get exposed to.
Was it the standard of your personal character standard, or was it standard of just keep on thinking outside the box? Or
most importantly, and this speaks to cultures of organizations, because someone senior can have a tremendous amount of experience, but if they're not in a culture or they're not a human being that wants to share it and gets excited about sharing with younger people, that's just as important. And I think I always say to young people, when you're going to work in an organization, are you working with one person or is it multiple people? What's the dynamics? Because if you're working just for one person and that's your kind of solo job, you better hope that they're really a good mentor. So yeah, there was the high integrity of people. And then there was just that standard of like, know every detail.
Was it just to kind of shift a little bit then over to Lead Dog? What was that moment? I mean, did you have a Jerry Maguire moment? Did you have one of your mentors say, that Mannix kid, he really should start his own agency, or you saw the opportunity and you jumped at it?
It's probably a combination of things. I mean, I literally came up with the idea or the concept for Lead Dog and the name when I was 24. It was the simple seed, unlike the like, wow, let me aspire to this. Like, I was like, if this person can have their own company, I'm like, I can. So I started doodling, and I had a t-shirt, which I just packed up in the basement. It said, if you're not the lead dog, the scenery never changes. So I started doodling initials and thinking of names of companies, and ended up coming up with Lead Dog and doodling, and literally kind of like forgot about it. Right. And like, so it wasn't like all my years at the MBA, I'm like, I can't wait to start my agency. Not at all. Like, it was just like, had the thought, went backpacking for 10 months, came back literally in the country from New Zealand, had this long goatee. And it was like pre-internet, start calling people. I was like, thinking of like starting Lead Dog at that point, but it wasn't even like, I did like a 2-page Word document of notes. And a woman who I used to hire at the MBA to help us with the halftime shows, she was working with an amazing individual named Steve Helmuth, who had been at the MBA, who's over at MLB. And they said, hey, can you come in for a week to Fenway Park and just help us out with on-field production for entertainment management in '99? And I was like, sure. I remember shaving the goatee. I had been so in backpack land for like 10 months, being at the airport, so nervous. And I remember the first production meeting just felt like a fish out of water. And then, 2 hours in, it just kind of like kicked back into gear. So did that week, was an incredible experience. One of my best friends in the world worked at baseball. So I'm on the field in Fenway with my college roommate, Pat Courtney, which was just surreal. And baseball liked what I did, and they ended up bringing me back, which was then Lead Dog in 2000 and in 2001. And so baseball became our first client. For the next 8 years, we helped produce the All-Star game. And to your point, so then I started thinking, okay, do I have an agency? And I'm like, well, what do I suck at? And I had a gentleman named Charlie Schwartz who worked with me at the Olympics, who was a machine of organization and diligence and detail, and an incredible woman named Siobhan Dennehy, who's Irish, who I worked with at the NBA, who was a dear friend. So I started having conversations with them, and hey, I mean, it was still just so conceptual. And then had this weekend where they met each other to see chemistry. And luckily, when we actually did start, I rented a desk to a gentleman who had worked for 20 years at an agency, because I had no clue. He would scream across the room. He was also very direct. I'd say something and I'd get off the phone. He's like, you don't know what you're doing. You need to double that price. I mean, literally was like my way of the peaceful warrior. Like, again, you look back and you're like, how lucky you were at different, whether coaches in different forms or mentors, like where you're like, wow, this never would have happened if I didn't have this person helping to guide me.
About support. Talk about family. Talk about growing up. Much of that was your foundation of what you became. Were your parents like just kicked you out into the world and said, "Go get them, Mannix. You can make this happen"? Like, were they entrepreneurs?
Wow, that's a loaded question, which could go down a path of like a full therapy session. But my parents were amazing growing up, and a big influence on me. They got divorced when I was in third grade, so that was incredibly jarring for me. So part of when I think of then, and I was very lucky because my dad moved out, but was very active in my life, and almost get emotional. I think like I was on a traveling soccer team. I'd always be that, like, looking over on the sidelines, waiting to see like when my dad was there, and he was one of the, there was those couple parents that were like the regulars, and my dad always came to my games, and he had played basketball and I played basketball, and so that was a big influence. My grandfather, actually my mom's father, was also a big influence on me related to sports. I think the amazing thing about my dad as an influence was being open to whatever I wanted. It was just such full support. I mean, I remember calling him when I was gonna, after the Olympics, I was switching over to the WNBA. So I was able to take like a 7 week interruption almost before coming back because the Olympics was so exhausting. So I went to Thailand actually, backpacking, kind of opened my eyes to backpacking culture and planted the seed of like different part of the world. So when I resigned from the WNBA, it was to actually backpack for about 10 and a half months. And, I was so nervous. Am I throwing my career away? I'm like, I don't know, I was like 30. I'm like, what am I doing in some ways? But it was like, it just was drawing to me. And my dad was so supportive along the way, which was like, versus, being a naysayer to that. The other thing, I was on the phone with the president of the Astrodome, and I said I was traveling across the country right after college graduation. And he said, "Oh, great. When you're going to be through Houston, why don't you call me and we'll come in and set something up?" And I got off the phone, and for whatever reason, my dad was actually home that day for lunch. And I got off the phone, and my dad was like, "This is the president of the Astrodome, owns the Astros." He goes, "Who knows if he'll be in Houston when you're going through or set up?" And so it was one of those raise your hand and say I'll do X. He goes, "He may not be there." He goes like, you may want to set something up and just be proactive. So I literally called back like 3 minutes later, talked to Alice, who I'll never forget because she became my phone buddy as I for months called trying to see if I got the job. And I said, "You know what?" And they were just like, this was like a favor to get in the door. I said, "You know what? I'll fly out. You tell me the dates. I'll fly out. Which, I paid for it. Flew out and had 2 days of interviews, and they put me through the ringer for 2 days. And then months later, after many phone calls from payphones around the country, again, before a lot of the devices, in Telluride, Colorado, on the side of like a highway, I finally found out I was offered an administrative assistant position for like no money at the Astronome, and then drove.
What was success? What did success look like to you when you sold Lead Dog?
I mean, look, success for me, not to be corny, but it's kind of always what, it's how you make other people feel, right? And if I got hit by a truck tomorrow, have I, have I made other people's load lighter in life? Have I, I make a million mistakes. I'm disorganized. I talk too much, as you can tell. Like I get excited. So it's like, try and do the right thing. Try and give back. Try and set up. And it's part of why I sold Lead Dog is because of some things I want to do in terms of social impact. So at the end of the day, it's like, what hopefully impact you can have on other people. And for me, it's so much, it sounds corny, so much about the journey versus the destination. Now, at the very end, when we were selling, all of a sudden, like numbers and things that like financially start actually creeping in like greedy almost. And you start thinking in a way that I had never thought for 17 years. So it kind of like is a good reminder of like what drives you, what drives people. But
so I know that we talked about just, being an angel, being an investor, kind of taking that next, the next half, that next chapter in your life. And the things you look for, or like, what are those 2 to 3 key things, those key elements that you're looking for in anybody that's starting a business?
Definitely character and values, ethics. I come across, and part of that's what you see, part of that's connecting with people who've worked with them, your own gut, their track record. I've had what do people do when there's like when things hit the fan, right? What's that quote where like you don't see the true test of character when everything's going well. It's when actually there's storms, right? So I've seen some people out of convenience either try and change their evaluation when someone else comes in and different things. It's like, whoa, this isn't who I want to be associated with. So for me, on the simplest level, and it's part of my whole premise of like how to invest. First number of investments I made, and this was before I sold Lead Dog, so very small ones. Were in groups that we were actually working with, and we launched them. So you got to work with them for 6 months. Very different than investor pitches where everybody's showing up in their perfect outfits. Everything's trying to be perfect. You do one pitch, they like you. You do a second, maybe a third. They look at a business plan that's totally designed to show you like everything happening perfect. Like every business plan's like Michael Jordan. It's like, well, that doesn't always go in that direct line. So I remember having breakfast with Paul and being like, he mentioned something about they were fundraising, and I said, oh. My question was, because I'd already worked with him, I'm like, are you going to be around, Paul? And he's like, yeah. And like, I'm co-founder. I'm passionate about this. So I invested a small amount, and then the next year invested again, and the next year invested again. Part of, I think, everybody's got a plan. Mike Tyson's line, right? Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. So I ended up like being excited to be involved with Bright Farms. Then I met Open Doors through us being the agency for the NFL Players Association. Loved the two co-founders. Just again working with them day in and day out. We ended up becoming their agency to do PR. And you see how someone operates, right? There's just nothing. There's no one can tell me there's not a better vetting system and analysis to invest than actually to be their agency versus the dog and pony shows that happen. So invested in Open Doors early on. Same thing with Sports Innovation Lab. Josh Walker and Angela Ruggiero, just quality, integrity people. So, and after selling Lead Dog, I get easily excitable. And now we have, small investments in like 10 startups. But the theme for me is like Matt Bailey worked at Lead Dog for 3 years, started the company. I wanted to obviously look at his business plan and so forth, but I'm like, those things are going to change a million times. Matt's an amazing guy. He's got that chip. He works well with people. He's got high integrity. He's not going to throw in the towel after like the first 6 bumps, right? That's a lot of businesses why they stop. People get tired. There's a lot of valid reasons why businesses should close down, right? But like Matt's gonna make it. Like Carter Schwarborg, who's chief marketing officer for the Vendry. She was from 25 on, like our creative director at Lead Dog. She joined this company as a partner. I'm like, I'm in, like, so that's my my analysis is like, you bet on the jockey, not the horse. And then want to understand the industry. Hopefully there's some other value that I can provide through relationships, so it's not like the Warren Buffett thing I think is valuable. Don't invest in something that you have no idea about. Invest in things that you know or are passionate about. So
where are you mentally right now? Do you feel like you have so much more to do? Do you feel like, gosh, I got another 25 years to do even more?
So A, I'm happy. Yes. B, I hope I have another 25 years. I try not to look at it as like better, and it's like, I want to be my best. And what is that thing? And I think as I get older, like, what are the different inputs that you take that help you be the best person you can be? Like, look, when I was 30, I would never say on a podcast or got anybody to know, I would say that I was like seeing a therapist, right? But now it's like, okay, I'm seeing a therapist. Like, it's part of your growth as a human being, right? Like, and look, I'm very fortunate. My wife is a big part of this and an inspiration. Like we for years we were privileged to produce Oprah's big brand experiences, her Live Your Best Life tour. Very proud of working on her 10th anniversary that we helped create a bunch of components to it. So there's that aspect of live your best life. There's also the power of saying no, of like, no to like people and energy that are toxic to get out of your life, right? Because look, I tend to be someone who wants to have everybody like me and be connected and be, but there's an aspect of like that can be exhausting, and also like sometimes you can do it for the wrong reasons. I'm actually, in some ways, I've read a lot about when founders like transition, they lose their whatever, like maybe because I'm still very connected to CSM as a senior advisor, the company that acquired Lead Dog, and so many amazing, beautiful, passionate people that are there. So it's been a transition where it's not like 100 miles per hour to zero. I'm still actively involved as a senior advisor. And then separately, I think for me, look, I'm 54. I've thought about for years being able to have more of an impact with things that I'm passionate about. I hopefully have many, many more years. I think the word retirement is a dated term, because to me, if you wanted to play golf all day and that's what that looks like for you, great. Like whatever, like happiness is being able to control your time to spend it on the things you want and enjoy most, right? And having hopefully people that rise you up. And so I have that in spades in my life. I'm very fortunate.
Well, you're a legend,
and
me,
not at all, but thank you.
I'm sorry it took us so long to finally connect in life. And I've always followed you from afar, in Sports Business Journal, and the people that have worked for you have always been amazing. And I've never, ever heard any bad thing ever said about you ever. And so that's a testament.
Wow. Well, I'm speechless, I guess. Thank you. People I worked with are literally incredible, lifelong friends. And as an aside, like when we talked, getting to know each other for this, I mean, I need to make a movie about what you've done. It's pretty incredible. So right back at you. I was amazed of your story, and talk about putting yourself out there and what's next. Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, no, thanks for your time. I certainly appreciate it. Thanks for sharing your story.
Thanks. Have a great day.
The rooster, are those roosters going?
I'm so used to them. No joke. Those are actual roosters, aren't
It just adds another layer of greatness to this.
And the roosters like walks in our backyard lot and was like, cock-a-doodle-doo.